welcome to this installment of the Good Old Days audio collection. This is Ken Tate, editor of Good Old Days magazine, and your host for this look back to those days gone by. In this special collection of memories, we'll recollect those scary and delightful nights of Halloween's past, and those wonderful days of harvest time. Come back with me and share these memories of the time we know affectionately as the Good Old Days. Halloween always conjures up memories of fun times. Like most children of the good old days, my brother, sister, and I donned ghost sheets, rode witch brooms, and dressed as hobos as we went trick-or-treating. Living out in the country, we didn't have many homes to expect sweet treats from. Of course there was Grandma's, and she and Uncle Bob always provided us with plenty of plunder, since we were about the only kids who darkened their door. Then there was Aunt Marthy Jones, and, a little farther down the road, her brothers, Cephas and Trent. The Ballards lived on the other side of Grandma. They rounded out the houses we trick-or-treaters hoped would have a few pieces of candy. Now I know that Halloween was also a time for tricking as well. Our tricking was a bit ornery, but we knew better than to be destructive. It was understood that we could soap windows or unhinge gates, but Daddy would have none of such pranks as dismantling neighbors' wagons and hoisting them to barn tops. I must confess, I have tipped my share of outhouses, but as far as I know, none was ever in use at the time. Halloween was also a time of bonfires, roasting the rare treats of hot dogs and marshmallows while Daddy or Uncle Bob told ghost stories. We kids sat with eyes like saucers as they spun their tales so vividly. When it comes to Halloween, I think the memories that readers of Good Old Days magazine hold dearest are the ghost and goblin stories that ended up with a bit more innocent explanation. Here is one such story sent to me by Jody Gould. My Uncle Jim Swanson decided on a Halloween night long ago to ride his pony into the nearby town to see his girlfriend. After arriving in town, he joined his girl in giving out cookies and other treats to the children who came to her door. After a couple of hours, he noticed the sky was filled with dark, foreboding clouds. Jim decided to cut his visit short and try to beat the storm home. About halfway home, lightning flashed and thunder boomed all around him. In a few minutes, it started pouring rain. Within 5 miles of his parents' farm, there was a little white country church with a small cemetery behind it. Jim thought of the church, and knowing it was never locked, decided it was the perfect place to get out of the drenching downpour. He hurried there, where he tied his horse under a large tree and ran for shelter inside the church house. For a while, Jim stood at the back of the last pew, catching his breath. As he stood, dripping wet and shivering from the cold, a sudden flash of lightning illuminated the little auditorium. To his dismay and horror, he saw a ghostly white figure up by the pulpit. As he blinked and looked again, the white shape started floating swiftly toward him. All reason left young Jim. He turned and ran out the door, untied his horse, and leaped on his back. Unfortunately for Jim, the strange white apparition jumped on right behind him and clasped its arms firmly around his waist. As his horse ran madly on in the pouring rain, Jim felt terror-stricken. Nothing like this had ever happened to him in all his 21 years. He had found a ghost, and it had him. His life flashed before his eyes. A small, quavering voice floated from behind him. "Where are we going? Are you taking me home, young man?" The white apparition that had frightened him so badly was a feeble old woman from a nearby nursing home. Jim later found out that she escaped often from the home, and this Halloween night had left there wearing nothing but her long, white nightgown. With her frizzy white hair and ghostly gown, she had given Jim Swanson a Halloween to remember, and a story to pass on for generations. Sometimes the spook out to get us kids had a bit closer relationship than we first realized. That was what Judith Rogers discovered on that one wonderful, terrible Unforgettable Halloween.
The Depression was pretty much over in the late 30s, but prosperity hadn't yet found its way to our small Ohio farm. My father worked hard to make ends meet, however skimpily, in those days. If he wasn't working the fields with our two sturdy Morgan horses, Kate and Liz, he'd be milking our 8 cows, tending to the hogs, or feeding the chickens, which laid the eggs he sold in Barbertown for a scant 10 cents a dozen. I was the baby of the family. How I hated to hear myself called that, the 4th child and only girl. Mama is fond of recalling how she cried when she learned I was on the way. After 3 strapping boys, all she could envision was another pair of overalls on that already sagging clothesline. I guess she was sorry clear up to the minute I was born there in our farmhouse. But when the doctor slapped me, looked at Mama, and beamingly exclaimed, "It's a girl," the sorrow disappeared, and all she could do was murmur over and over, "Isn't she sweet? Isn't she sweet?" "I couldn't even see you because my eyes were closed," she would tell me in later years, "but I knew you couldn't be anything but sweet." Many hilarious and other not-so-hilarious incidents float to the surface of my mind in recalling those years on the farm, but an event which looms large in my memory is that one particular Halloween night in 1939. Living on a farm before these noisy days of television meant that we had to create our own fun, and create we did. We were too far from other farms for neighborhood parties, so we had our own special Halloween ritual. Early in the day, we 4 scoured the pumpkin patch for exactly the right ones we needed. Then, armed with pencils for marking lines, knives for cutting, and lots of old paper for the mess we were making, we turned out some pretty fair pumpkin faces. Being only 4, I, of course, had help with mine, but I can still remember that particular scary face. The day seemed terribly long, since nothing much happens on Halloween before dark. Bob, as the eldest, had the privilege of lighting the silent, waiting faces. One by one, the terrible, scowling jack-o'-lanterns came alive, and we stood entranced. I slowly turned around, hoping to see nothing more than a dark, empty yard, but there, creeping stealthily around the side of the house and heading straight for us, was a huge black thing, arms outstretched, with just a big black lump for a face and covered with a limp old hat. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. My usually active mouth was frozen shut. Bob, Theo, and David were mumbling incantations and staring at the jack-o'-lanterns, while all I could do was stand, transfixed. Growled the thing as it came closer and started to grab for Theo, who took off like a bolt of lightning when he quickly glanced around. Bob and David started yelling and running with that thing, first chasing one, then the other, then the other. I regained control of my legs and tore to the safety of the house. There on the porch I stood, beside an unusually calm mother. Mama, who screams at the slightest provocation. "Are you Wally Beechler?" she cried. "No," came back a slow reply. The boys disappeared, hollering all the way down to the peep house with that thing steadily plodding on behind them. It was now threatening in a low, slow monotone as it ran, "I'm gonna get you! I'm gonna get you!" With this, the boys would spread out and the thing would again chase one, then the other, while they tried desperately to lose their pursuer. "Mama, where's Daddy?" I suddenly asked. "Oh, he's probably in the front room, reading or listening to the radio." Strange that he hadn't heard all the commotion, I thought, and ran in to tell him what was going on. He wasn't there. He wasn't anywhere. I looked. Back to the porch I ran, where the chase was still going on. "Are you Ben Steiner?" Mama persisted, as the thing came thudding by again. "No," it panted. "Mama, is that Daddy out there?" I asked, revelation finally beginning to dawn. "Why? Isn't he in the front room?" "No, I looked everywhere." "That's Daddy, isn't it?" "Well," she smiled, "it just might be." The chase was noticeably slowing down as 3 frightened boys and 1 tired, warmly overdressed father were quickly wearing out. Finally, they all dropped to the ground by the porch step when it called to my mother, "Frida, come out here and help me out of this derned outfit." Then, huffing and puffing as a 225-pound man with some unexpected excessive exercise would, he looked at the boys and laughed. "Well, I had you all fooled, didn't I?" "No, you didn't," Bob retorted. "I knew you all the time." "Why'd you run so hard then?" roared Daddy. "I knew it was you when you almost got me at the chicken house," Theo remembered. "I recognized your voice." "I knew it was you all the time, too," fibbed David. "I knew it was you, too, Daddy," I piped in, still from the safety of the porch. "You weren't in your chair." And then we laughed. Oh, how we laughed. Pumpkin faces and Halloween rituals forgotten, we all lived and relived that chase over cookies and cider till bedtime. Who had more fun? A hard-working father who still had enough energy and imagination to turn an average Halloween into a memorable one, or we four still slightly weak children who claim to this day that we knew it was him all the time. Psychologists today would no doubt blame all sorts of frustrations on parents creating a frantic madcap chase scene as that one was. I only know that my 3 well-adjusted brothers and I fondly recall that horror-filled night so many years ago with belly-aching laughter, and we all agree that it was, indeed, one unforgettable Halloween.
Outhouses and Halloween just seemed to go together. Betty Rhodes' grandpa figured out a way to stop the pranksters from toppling his facility. See how he did it as Betty remembers Grandpa's little house.
In 1932, my grandfather had one of the last outhouses in his area. It looked like the beautiful little witch's cottage right out of Hansel and Gretel. It was a pretty little yellow house trimmed in brown with a green thatched roof and beautiful flowers everywhere. Grandpa was proud of his outhouse and always called it the little house because Grandma was too delicate to refer to it as an outhouse or even a privy. It was the biggest little house in the neighborhood, a 3-holer with a special grandchild seat, magazine rack, a shelf for a lantern, and the traditional half-moon in the door. It also had 2 stars cut out for windows in the sides of the building with little window boxes of geraniums. Grandma believed in privacy as far as the little house was concerned. She planted sunflowers on both sides of the stone path leading to it, and hollyhocks and gladiolas to hide the sunflower stems. She planted roses to disguise any odor she considered offensive. Right by the door of the little house were the biggest, juiciest blackberries we ever saw, and we often picked a handful and ate them while sitting inside. Grandpa was also proud of the strong horseradish that grew in the back of the building. He ground it himself and gave crocks of it to his friends for all occasions. Grandpa and Grandma spent many hours a week trimming, pruning, planting, and weeding to keep their little house attractive. The biggest frustration in Grandpa's life was Halloween. Every Halloween, the big boys in the neighborhood crept through the foliage and tipped over the outhouse. It was great sport for them, and Grandpa always got hopping mad. His flowers were trampled and broken, and sometimes he had to repaint the trim or repair a broken board. Every year he called the police and swore out a John Doe warrant, but the culprits were never caught. And to rub salt in the wound, Grandpa's was the only outhouse that was ever tipped over in his area. We all thought it was because he was so proud of it. One Halloween, Grandpa decided to take matters into his own hands. He filled a shotgun full of rock salt, took his pipe and a warm coat, and began his all-night vigil of sitting in his little house. Grandpa was an extremely early riser and usually retired by 9 o'clock, so by 1 a.m. he could not stay awake. He leaned back and closed his eyes, keeping his gun cocked in readiness across his lap, and immediately dozed off. He dreamt he was floating down a gentle river when he suddenly came to the rapids and, waking with a start, realized the outhouse was tipping over. He hollered at the top of his lungs, "Hey, what in tarnation do you think you're doing?" and desperately grabbed for his support. When he dropped the gun, the jar discharged it. The barrel was pointed toward the grandchild seat, and when the gun roared, there was an immediate cry of pain and a frantic scurrying sound. "Let's get out of here!" someone yelled. "Hey, I'm shot!" a second voice cried in terror. "You'd better run or you'll be dead," another voice gasped unsympathetically. Now the outhouse had tipped over frontward, and Grandpa couldn't get out the door, so he stuck his head out the biggest hole. "Rosie, come get me out of here." Grandma turned on the back porch light in time to see 3 forms leaping through her vegetable patch toward the orchard. She ended up having to call my father and uncle from a few houses away to come tip the outhouse up so Grandpa could get out. His dignity was badly damaged, but otherwise he wasn't seriously injured. The boys who tipped him over were not apprehended, but they never bothered him again. I think the sound of Grandpa yelling, the gun firing and evidently hitting one of them, and Grandma screaming must have convinced the pranksters that ghosts and goblins really did ride through the night on Halloween.
South of the border, down Mexico way, that's where I fell in love when stars above came out to play. And now as I wander, my thoughts ever stray. South of the border, down Mexico way, she was a picture in old Spanish lace. Just for a tender while I kissed the smile upon her face, for it was fiesta, and we were so gay. South of the border, down Mexico.
That was South of the Border, performed by Donald Novus on the Fibber, McGee, and Molly Show, originally broadcast October 10th, 1939. While we're on the subject of ambushing Halloween pranksters, G. Edgar Hall's Uncle Roy decided to teach a few of them a lesson too. Revel in how they tricked the trickers and pulled off a Halloween ambush.
I shall never forget the Halloween of 1932. The long, narrow main street of West Frankfort, Illinois, was roped off that late afternoon for the night-long festivities of both square and round dancing, amateur performances, and the judging of contests. Costumes and decorated windows by soap artists were main attractions. The controlled festivities, however, never deterred the more ambitious pranksters, and the idle hours of those Depression years bred scores of ideas. My older brother and his 2 friends had their own plans. I wanted to go with them, but my brother said I was too young. My Uncle Roy heard me begging. "Georgie, you can team up with me," he said. "I have a plan, too. Who wants to tie strings of firecrackers to a couple of old mules' tails and ignite them? It's childish, pure kid stuff. Let's pull a prank on the pranksters." Taking me to one side, he explained, "The 3 brothers on Elm Street told me they're going to push over every outhouse on this block." Well, I pretended to fly into a rage. I told them I'd kill anyone for that. I said I wouldn't be found guilty either, that it's a clear case of trespass and damage to one's property. I told them they'd better not come down my alley unless they like funerals. I really poured it on, he said, grinning. They'll do it now or die trying, as the saying goes. And before the night's over, they'll think they are going to die. Their father is all for it and says the boys need a good scare. In fact, he's helping set them up. He told them I may be a coal miner, but I had studied law for a year. He warned them not to let my small size fool them either, that I had a temper like a buzzsaw. Don't cross him, he warned. Oh yes, they'll be here all right. On Halloween, before dark, we'll connect the outhouse to the coal shed. They won't have a chance of getting it tipped. But when they're trying, that's when the fun starts. On Halloween night, we waited in the house. A midnight moon penetrated the darkness, and we could easily see the little building through the kitchen window. Uncle Roy touched my shoulder. "Be real quiet," he said. "I think they're here." Easing the door open, we heard muffled voices. He had to reinforce it. I know I could have pushed it over. Now I can't budge it. Forget about watching the house. It's going to take all of us. He's probably asleep anyway. With the boys thus occupied, Uncle Roy quietly lifted the big .45 pistol from the table and stepped out onto the high open porch. "I warned you," he screamed angrily. "Now I'm going to show you." The smell of gunpowder wafted across the area as the thunderous .45 buried its bullets in the soil near the porch. "Run!" shouted one of the boys as he dashed to the vacant lot across the alley. At the other end of the lot was my brother Paul's house. Never dreaming he'd get in on the fun, he had nevertheless stepped outside when the shots rang out to see the two boys running frantically past the house. Then the third one, who had evidently fallen. He was crawling across the lot as fast as he could on his hands and knees, obviously too scared to get to his feet. Adding to the fun, Paul shouted, "Get up and run for your life! He'll kill you! Quick! He's coming this way!" "My God!" croaked the crawling boy, gasping for breath. Just then, Uncle Roy fired the last shot, which must have released an abundance of adrenaline in the young man. With a burst of energy, he leaped straight up, landed on his feet, and started to run. Paul says the record for a 20-yard dash was definitely broken. "A witch on a broom couldn't have caught that boy," he said, as we doubled over with laughter. I jumped with glee. "Uncle Roy, I bet those old mules with firecrackers tied to their tails didn't even run that fast."
Is there such a thing as a haunted house? Frank Johnson wanted to know if the spooky old house west of his family's farm was inhabited by spirits. His conclusion may amuse you as he investigates our haunting mystery.
When I was a child, from the age of 6 to 14 years, I was very much interested in spook stories, which were told by the elders beside the fireplace when we entertained visitors, mostly neighbors. I'm now 81 years of age, so it seems queer that we should believe in those things at all. I was even scared to go outside after dark. We lived and worked on a farm in northwest Indiana. Our neighboring farm on the west had very poor sandy ground. The owner could not make a living on it, so moved to Chicago to work. This all happened before my time. The house, therefore, was vacant most of those days. It was a 2-story house, well built. Occasionally, people would rent the place, but found that they too could not make a go at it and moved out. There were 3 different renters during the time from 1898 to 1909, at which time we left our farm after my father's death. This house was supposed to be haunted, and by the stories that were told, and by our own experience, it would seem to be true. But as I became older, I found it all to be a hoax. My mother had a friend whom she visited quite often. They lived on the farm west of the haunted house, so that when Mother would return from her visit at dusk, she had to pass this haunted place. She told us once that as she passed the place, she heard a rumble like horses coming down the stairs. It was probably rats chasing up and down stairs, and imagination enlarged the noise. All this happened before rural free mail delivery, so we had to drive to town about every other day to get our mail and whatever groceries we needed. We had 2 horses. One was gray, the other black. Once my father drove to town with the black horse and left the gray in the barn. On his return at dusk, coming up the hill just before he reached the haunted house, he thought he saw the gray horse pasturing on the road opposite the house. He thought Mother had let the horse out on the road to eat the lush grass growing here, so he would bring the horse back with him. The further up the hill he came, the fainter the horse became, until finally it disappeared entirely. When Dad got home, he asked Mother if she'd let the gray horse out, and she said, "No, he's still in the barn." Another figment of the imagination. At another time, my buddy's school chum and I were learning to smoke corn silks, oak leaves, or whatever would make a smudge. Our parents got wise to it and hid the matches, so we were out of luck. There were no penny packs of matches then. We were on our way to church one Sunday evening, and we started early to see what fun we could get into. Back of the haunted house was a downslope to a creek, and as we were passing, we saw what we thought was a bonfire about to die out. We figured we could get a light for our handmade cigarette of corn silk rolled in newspaper, so we climbed through the fence. but could not see the fire. So we climbed back through the fence, and sure enough, there it was. We tried again with the same results, so we carefully marked the spot. The next morning on our way to school, we went there again and found a piece of broken mirror, and then we figured it out. The full moon was at the right angle to cause a reflection in the mirror only when we were standing on the road side of the fence. As we grew older, we had some doubts about the ghost stories in the haunted house. It was on a New Year's Eve. Mother and my sisters were going to the church to wait for the New Year. My brother, who was 11 years older than I, asked me if I would join him at the haunted house to see if we could scare up some ghosts. I said I would if he would bring his rifle along. He laughed and said, You can't shoot a ghost. The bullet will go right through it and not affect the ghost at all. We sat up in the attic until the women got back from church, and we didn't see anything, although we did hear some mice and rats scampering around. The only story I ever knew to be true about the old haunted house could be laid at the feet of a different kind of spirit. My sister worked taking care of an elderly lady there in the days before the house went vacant. Her husband was a grape grower and winemaker. Liking stronger drink than wine, he often went to town to slack his thirst. On this one occasion, he returned late in the evening, well soused. Staggering to bed, he fell asleep in a stupor. During the night, he rolled over, pulling the bed cover off his feet. Awakening, possibly from cold feet, he found himself staring at a bald-headed apparition floating at the foot of his bed, illuminated in the glow of a moonbeam streaming through the window. It looked as though a man was peering at him over the edge of the bed. "Who's there?" he demanded. With no answer forthcoming, he spoke again. "If you don't answer this time, I'll shoot." He reached under his pillow for his revolver, took aim at the intruder, and shot his big toe off. Small wonder he didn't get an answer. The bald-headed spook was his appendage, and the only spirits in the house were the ones he had lately consumed. I moved away from the area as a youngster, but returned to the old home place in the early 60s. There, to the west of our old farm, was the old house, standing as vacant, gruesome, and ghost-like as ever. No Halloween goes by without my thoughts turning back to the old haunted house of my youth.